hopefully. We're streaming. This is Wesley Shantz here with Signum Academy on Twitch. And I think I mentioned at the end of our last meeting 2 weeks ago, there are some new programs running as part of Signum Academy. You go to the signumuniversity.org website and you find Signum Academy up here among the many programs university offers and is affiliated with. There's a book club, a writing club, and a translation club currently running. There's also conversation clubs that'll start up in the future. We would love for more people to get involved, and particularly at this point in the state of New Hampshire, there's a program that we are partnered with where students can get credit, school credit for participation in our clubs. That's the Learn Everywhere program. It's in New Hampshire now. It may be in other states soon. So if that sounds interesting to you, if that sounds like something you might want to be part of, do get in touch with us. We are also on Twitch, and this meeting today will conclude our discussion of Rosemary Sutcliff in the spring. I know it barely feels like spring here. It's kind of my best attempt to break the year up into 3. And so the spring dedicated to Rosemary Sutcliff, the summer, what we're going to do next, L.M. Montgomery, the author of the Anne of Green Gables books. And so we'll start with Anne of Green Gables as the most famous, and it happens to be the only one of her books that I've actually read. And I just love it. I think it's fantastic. That'll be for our next month. And then through the summer, we'll be reading one of her other series, Emily of New Moon, and its sequels in June, July, and August. So if you are looking forward to more reading with us on Twitch, that's what we're going to be doing in the summer. And in the fall, Tove Jansson, one of my absolute favorite authors. So of those books, I think I've read them all, but I really enjoy them, and I am more than happy to reread them with you all. Now, I think I mentioned that Rosemary Sutcliff was new to me as of this year and this project. I only heard about her from one of the listeners out there on Twitch. So I'll be kind of popping back and forth into that Twitch chat. If you have ideas, if you have questions, put them in the chat there, and I will try to respond to them. We might just read the book that you recommend. So that's a good way to get in touch if you're here live. If you're listening down the line somewhere, then you can always send us an email and get in touch with us through our website there. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pick up where we left off last time in The Road to Camlann, the final book in Rosemary Sutcliff's Arthur trilogy. And I believe that we had just been talking about Lancelot and his miracle. If not, just to recap, we know that Lancelot has wanted to perform a miracle, to be granted that grace of the representation through healing or through some other way of showing that he is truly a great knight, and not just a great, but a good person. He finally has that wish, that long dream granted in this moment when he's rescued Gwenevere from the recreant knights or Meliagrance, who kidnapped her. He's made it back from the trap that Meleagrant set for him. He has defeated the knight in single combat and done it with one hand tied behind his back, what's more, literally. And in this moment, Lancelot is really at the peak of his greatness as a warrior and a knight and as a believer as well. As we're shown here, the way that this happens, he feels power and love flow through him. So he becomes a vessel. This is the passage. It feels to him like a wind or fire or his own heart's blood. So this power, this love passes through Lancelot and effectively restores the life of the wounded knight. So it's this little moment that, in a way, brings back all of what happened in the Grail quest. And I think it's really interesting that Lancelot responds by kneeling, covering his face with his hands, weeping like a little child that has been beaten. That's a very strong image, very uncomfortable to think about a child who is beaten. By that, we don't mean that they lost in a game. They were hurt. The idea that the child would be hurt by somebody on purpose is really a terrible image for us to connect with Lancelot here, the greatest warrior and protector of the innocent. And so whatever's happening in this moment, although he's really at his peak, it's also terribly painful for him. It's maybe even hard to read if you are kind of processing that and you have some thoughts. By all means, please talk about them here if you're comfortable doing so. It gets worse. In that moment, Lancelot goes from his greatest sort of fullness and life. He plunges down into his darkest moment here. He's riding high. He, of course, is aware that what he has felt for the queen all this time is wrong, that kind of love is not the sort of thing that is supposed to happen. It's not the kind of love that brings healing to the wounded knight there. Instead, it's something that carries him away. And with his giving in to this passion for Gwenevere, we also have a group of knights led by Mordred, but also Gawain's other brothers, who are trying to get Arthur to accuse Lancelot of betrayal. It's not just that he loves Gwenevere, Arthur's queen, but that he should be serving Arthur, and instead he is holding him up to dishonor. He is causing Arthur to appear weak and deceived. That's the argument that Mordred is making here. They want punishment, not just for the queen, but for Lancelot as well. And Arthur finally gives in. He goes, as part of Mordred's plan, goes away hunting, and they lay in wait for Lancelot to mess up. Gawain does not warn Lancelot that this is happening. Instead, Sir Bors does. He seems to know, although he's not in those discussions, seems to know that something's up. He tells his brother, I think, his kinsman, to bring his sword with him when he goes to talk to Gwenevere in her chamber. It's a lucky thing that he does, This allows him to fight back when they're trapped in there. He kills the first knight who comes in, steals his armor, fights his way out, and ultimately, this is the end point of all of Mordred's plans. We saw Mordred trying to frame Gwenevere before. He finally catches Lancelot and Gwenevere together in this inappropriate situation, although all they're doing was talking in Rosemary Sutcliffe's version here. That's still too, it's too close. And Mordred is wounded when Lancelot makes his way out. He doesn't escape completely unscathed, but he has succeeded in splitting the Round Table. The fellowship of the knights is never going to be the same after this. It's, in a way, the same thing that happened already during the Grail quest, when all the knights left and Arthur was kind of left alone. So Arthur has sort of foreseen this happening, and this is a particularly disastrous way for it to happen, right? For him to be separated from his queen, for his best knight, his most loyal member of that Round Table, to be the culprit, to be guilty of betrayal. And Mordred, his own son, again, has kind of pushed him to this point. So it's very, very dark here. Lancelot is forced to fight back against his king in order to protect Gwenevere from what actually should be the justice of the law that the king has to uphold. So they're all sort of caught in this complicated web. Lancelot and Gwenevere, something that seems good, this love that they feel, is impossible. Arthur and Mordred, father and son, are working against one another, and they can't really tell the truth. And the law itself, the thing that Arthur has fought to bring to his kingdom, is forcing him to go against Lancelot and Gwenevere. So, in the end, the rescue of Gwenevere comes about. This is a moment where we see Lancelot really lose control. It's even worse than when he's fighting his way out of her chamber, because he's fighting against unarmed men. It's almost the reverse of that situation, where he was without armor, had his sword, of course, it wasn't unarmed, and they were all in armor, all against him. Now, he comes in fighting sort of in a fury, not really knowing what he's doing, ends up killing Gawain's brothers, Gaheris and Gareth. And so Gawain, who was really on his side before against Mordred, now shifts to become the most aggressive voice, calling for Lancelot to be punished, to be killed. So we bring Gawain into the terrible strife, right? And that, in a way, all of the knights have to choose at this point to go side with Arthur and Gawain and Mordred, or to side with Lancelot. So it's a terrible strain on the Round Table. This classic sort of dilemma of honor, right, loyalty versus love, or what you personally desire for your individuality. This is sort of the essential theme of a lot of old Germanic and Northern poetry, Norse poetry and Icelandic stories. But you see this in other cultures as well, wherever there's this conflict between two good things. Again, the good thing that is loyalty and serving your king, and the good thing that is following your own love, your own desire. Um, Perhaps there's competing loyalties, right, to save Gwenevere versus to serve Arthur. You could think of it that way as well. And so we're caught on the horns of this dilemma, on this impossible situation. Lancelot has taken the queen away. He's rescued her life, but he's taken her away. So in a way, he's like Meleagrance now. He's like the evil knight. But at the same time, he remains the greatest warrior, the one who was able to perform this miracle, right? The thing that he had always longed to do. And he has everything that he wished for now. He has Gwenevere, but at the cost of destroying the kingdom, essentially. So the pain here is incredibly deep. And it's hard to read. The last half of this book really is just so sad. We find another really interesting moment, though, if we go a few pages into this battle scene, at page 82 in this version, they fought the whole day. Gawain's trying to find Lancelot and kills Sir Lionel. Bors, seeing his brother killed, avenges him, hacks Gawain down, and then he's shield to shield with Arthur himself. Here we go. For a few straining and sweating moments they grappled together, their swords locked at the hilt, like the still center at the heart of a whirlpool, among the surge of men and horses all about them. And then Sir Bors broke his blade free and fetched the king a blow that pitched him down into the bloody dust, under the trampling hooves of the battle. Sir Bors, plunging out of the saddle, stood over him with drawn sword, and a little gap opened as the fighting shifted, and Sir Lancelot was there. Bors shouted to him, "Shall I make an end to this war?" "Not in that way, unless you would lose your own head. For I will not see my liege lord either slain or shamed while I stand by." They could have won the battle by killing Arthur, but that price is too high for Lancelot. And Bors might have been willing to do it, but he, too, shows loyalty, in this case to Lancelot, and spares Arthur. Lancelot helps Arthur back into the saddle. He literally kneels down and gives him a boost up onto his horse. And he begs him to end this, to take the queen back. And here's another interesting moment. The argument that Mordred has been making, that Arthur has found true and right, is that the law demands the queen pay the price for her betrayal. But, as Lancelot says, mercy is above the law. Can you not give her mercy? So, the idea that in this conflict between the law and love or mercy, that mercy should prevail, is, again, very important as a difference, I think, between the kinds of stories that you get in Christian Europe. This is a Christian story. God is very important here, the Christian God, versus the kind of stories you get in the pagan Germanic tales, the tales that really focus on vengeance, on getting justice that way. So this is something new that enters in with things like the Grail when it's brought to Britain in the story. Lancelot, as the voice of mercy, maybe a little bit ironic given that he did not show mercy to the people in the crowd when he rescued the queen. He killed innocent people, or unarmed people anyway. But then again, Lancelot has always tried to be the best knight, not just the greatest warrior, but the best morally and the most upstanding. He's shown mercy to Arthur, and now he begs Arthur to show mercy to Guinevere, to everyone, to let this fighting stop. And so it looks as though this might be possible. The trouble is that Mordred and, at this point again, Gawain are not willing to let the fighting end. For them, this has to be pushed to the end point, to the breaking point. And so they pursue Lancelot back to his other castle back in France, northern France, called Brittany, which is a little confusing. We have another level of Mordred's plan brought into play here. The king and Gawain go to fight against Lancelot, and Arthur leaves Mordred in charge in his place back in Camelot. So Mordred, as we see in the next chapter here, becomes a usurper. He takes power for himself. He spreads rumors that Arthur has been killed in the battle, and that this leaves him as the rightful heir and king. A particularly uncomfortable part of this is that he thinks that this entitles him to marry Guinevere. So he is not only going to steal the kingdom, but he's also going to take Arthur's queen. Now, in different versions of the story, Mordred's motivation is presented a little bit differently. In this version, it sounds like his hatred of Arthur is really driving him, and the kinds of things he's been told by his mother and her family. In the version that Tolkien wrote, called The Fall of Arthur, I don't know if we've talked about this maybe during other times. We mentioned Tolkien's other books besides The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. He's got a lot of them edited by his son Christopher Tolkien. And The Fall of Arthur is an unfinished poem that imitates the style of alliteration or alliterative verse that Tolkien studied so much in poems like Beowulf and Gawain and the Green Knight, another poem that he translated. So in The Fall of Arthur, Tolkien doesn't really include this stuff with Lancelot and Guinevere so much, but he does emphasize in a kind of surprising way how much Mordred's desire for Guinevere is causing him to do this. So there isn't a lot of that sort of passion that's in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, much less The Hobbit. It's at least not very obvious. So it's kind of interesting that that's the thing that he really emphasizes. So this would be a challenge for you all out there to check out The Fall of Arthur, to see this aspect of Tolkien, his take on this really dark story and his way of showing Mordred's motivation is quite interesting. His portrayal of Guinevere, Arthur, these central characters, Gawain, is really, really interesting. And the whole setting that he creates for this version of his story. So in Rosemary Sutcliff's version, since it's written for kids, That's not really emphasized nearly as much here. Instead, she's really kind of going back to this idea of mercy. The way that the church and its archbishop here is presented. He refuses to recognize Mordred. He chooses instead to go into sort of voluntarily to leave, to become a hermit. And that becomes important at the very end. This idea, again, that there's something higher than the law, right? Mordred trying to go with a very basic understanding of justice, what he deserves, what's right, versus the way that the archbishop, the church, sees justice as being a part of a larger picture of mercy. So Mordred has mostly got everything he wants, but he hasn't been able to marry the queen. She escapes here. She manages to get away from the clutches of Mordred. She manages to get this letter over to Arthur and Gawain, who immediately head back, and Lancelot is going to follow as well, but not in time. Not in time. This brings us to sort of the final battle, as we talked about. The title of this book, the Camlann plain, or the area, is where this battle is going to take place. Merlin has foretold this. It is fated to happen, and it is fated to end this way. Because Arthur has been unable to show mercy, because he married Gwenevere in the first place, which Merlin told him was not going to end well. Because of all of these decisions and choices and steps, we are brought inevitably, as it turns out, to Camlann. And I did a little bit of searching about this. This would be something else, maybe to challenge yourself with, to look at some of the historical records that these legends are connected with. There's some theories about what Camlann might have actually been. Maybe it was a place where a battle took place. Maybe it was an important defeat for the forces of order represented by Rome, or some vestige of the Roman Empire at that point. It's unclear. The name Mordred, or the name that becomes Mordred, is connected with this place in some of the records, although it's not explained who or what Mordred was to Arthur. So in the tradition, this is the point where not only do the remaining knights supporting Arthur have to choose sort of whether they're with him or with this new, more kind of lax ruler in Mordred. The remaining knights tear themselves apart. It's a terribly bloody battle. And it is concluded with the death, not just of Arthur, but of Mordred as well. So they kill one another. There is no heir. There is no way out of this dilemma. And Gawain, in a way, foretells this. So he dies as they're returning to England. His spirit comes to warn Arthur against taking this final step and finishing Mordred off. But of all the moments in this portion of the story, the part that sticks with me the most is that Gawain finally forgives Lancelot. And the way that it happens is through a letter. I remember this really vividly, reading this part when I was reading T.H. White version of this story. It's just very, very moving. how Gawain writes this letter to Lancelot, explaining the situation, begging him to come, and letting their conflict go. Right? Again, this idea of mercy. I also just think, anyway, nowadays letters are so rare, like a handwritten letter. It's really meaningful, and I know that wasn't, of course, the original meaning there, but that's how I always sort of connected with that. So the battle concludes. Basically, everyone is dead on both sides. Arthur is essentially dying, but there's this mystery where he gets Bedivere, kind of the last remaining knight, to throw Excalibur back into the lake, and he tries to not do it, and finally on the third time, this fairy tale moment, he does and sees the hand grab it. In the same way that Excalibur is given back to where it came from, Arthur is taken away to Avalon, to this magical sort of parallel reality. And the legend goes that Arthur will return someday. If that is maybe to be taken as a metaphor, right? That the kind of kingdom that Arthur was trying to create, that justice, might return someday, after a dark age when England is separated into many kingdoms and invaded by Vikings. Eventually, of course, it is reunited. It is brought back into justice. So in a way, Arthur returns. You could think of it maybe in a more mythic sense too, and there's plenty of retellings that go this route, where we have Arthur come back in maybe a more modern, kind of almost like a time travel story. And that's the route that C.S. Lewis kind of goes with his Arthur stories, which are interesting. You should check them out if you're into C.S. Lewis. Now, as we come to the end, I think we see again the way that Arthur has never really been the main character of this story. He is the figure that is above all of the Round Table, because he represents this idea of justice and order. But he has his flaws and his failings, his downfall. And actually, by the end of the story, Arthur is absent. He was absent for most of the middle portion with the Holy Grail quest, like we talked about. And instead, we actually go back to Gwenevere and Lancelot. At last, they find peace in their separate monasteries, right? They sort of let go of the court, of romance, of warfare, of course, and they commit themselves to healing, to the kind of forgiveness and mercy that Lancelot was trying to tell Arthur about, but hadn't really been able to live out up to this point. They end their days separately, but finally do seem to find the peace, the kind of thing that even in the Round Table and Arthur's order of chivalry, that kind of peace was never really possible, because of all those other complexities, conflicting motivations. Right? But they're on sort of the threshold here of this other realm, this parallel realm of Avalon. It is the place that Arthur has gone to recover, to await his calling back to the world. Whatever that means, right? And in a way, this seems to be at least part of the inspiration behind the way that The Lord of the Rings ends as well. That idea of sailing to the west. And in Tolkien's created realm, the name Avalone is something he takes and puts into his invented lands where they speak his invented languages, right? So he's almost making a direct reference here to this idea of Avalon, this place where healing and rest and peace is possible. It's a very beautiful image, I think, that this would be the Avalon of the apple trees. In a way, maybe referring back to that moment, the Garden of Eden, that we have talked about as well. But again, a place where there isn't this sin and the separation, but this kind of connectedness instead. This, I think, makes for a gentle, a softer, a kinder ending than some other versions of the story. And the way that Rosemary Sutcliff brings together such a huge legend and her retelling, I think, is very remarkable. Especially these past couple books are pretty brief. She really crystallizes sort of the important stuff. As far as stories of King Arthur go, I think this is a great one to read and to reread. You'll find more in it as you reread, as I was rereading for today. I certainly did. I would also, again, suggest for maybe older readers out there, check out The Fall of Arthur. The T.H. White version is also really great. The Sword in the Stone sequels there. If you have any Arthur stories that you really love, by all means, let us know. This is a pretty important part of the myths and legends that Tolkien and Lewis are drawing on, those kind of authors. And even if you fast forward sort of to more contemporary stuff like J.K. Rowling's books, make a lot of Arthurian references, the Harry Potter books, and tons of other media, video games, anime, movies will make connections back to King Arthur. So it's stories you've got to read. You just can never get old with these. So thanks very much, all of you who tuned in here live, and for those who are watching later, send us questions, send us comments. We can revisit some of the Rosemary Sutcliff material. So the King Arthur stories, the Beowulf, how those continue to resonate with people. Again, for next time, in May, first Monday in May, we'll be talking about Anne of Green Gables. And I'll give a kind of introduction to Ellen Montgomery, give some suggestions for articles and material you might want to check out. I, again, really enjoy getting to read these things with you and talk about them. I hope that you will have a great rest of your spring, and we'll see you next time in May. Thanks again.